Welcome to Charting Change in Legal. I am Ari Kaplan, an analyst that covers legal, and I am here with.
Caroline Hill. Hi, everyone. I am editor-in-chief of Legal IT Insider. Although I might drop the in chief, right? I'm like, who am I in chief of? It occurred to me the other day. I'm editor of Legal IT Insider.
Well, I'm principal of Ari Kaplan Advisors. My mother-in-law commonly says, "Who are the other advisors?" She just is so obsessed with the other advisors. So you can be editor in chief if you want. I think it's a great title and it's deserved and earned. So anyway, well, it's wonderful to chat again.
Likewise, likewise. How's your week been? What news?
My week has been great. I have to say that I had a really wonderful interview with Patrick DiDomenico and Stephanie Gudis. Stephanie is on the board, and Patrick is obviously one of the co-founders of the Knowledge Management and Innovation Conference. But what was so interesting about our conversation is that both are lawyers who practice like you and I, and then chose this path of trying to drive change that they felt they needed when they practiced and have been so successful at doing it, both in law firms and now Patrick in consulting and trying to create an environment where people can learn what they did and what their peers are doing. They were just inspiring, but it really spotlighted the fact that a lot of lawyers now are thinking about what that other path is. And there just seem to be so many roads, and it's wonderful. And they were great examples of it and spoke passionately about the wonderful things you can do in the practice of law, both as a practitioner and as someone that finds ways to elevate those practitioners. And it was a really interesting discussion, and it's really highlighted what I think is a trend in legal, which is really being much more of a unicorn and much more of a multifaceted and multi-talented professional in this environment.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I think, knowledge officers have typically always been lawyers, right? Like, so that I think, but I get what you're saying, that there's all these different paths. And it's interesting because I think it's about the way that lawyers can speak to lawyers. If you've got someone with tech aptitude. I was speaking to a CIO a few months ago, and they were looking at we're not going to talk about Gen AI, but they were talking about their Gen AI policy, and ways to move forward. And they ended up hiring an innovation head who is a former lawyer. And the way that it was explained to me was that they could speak the same language, that, the techies can have conversations about policy and all the technology side, but actually, and they've been doing this for a really long time and understand the business through and through. But their point was that lawyers can speak that language. So if you've got somebody who's a real hybrid, who understands technology, but also is a former lawyer, it's almost like people listen to you more. In fact, I'd go as far as to say it's not like, it is a case that people listen to you more. And I don't know if that is just because you speak the same language, or almost like there's that cultural emphasis as well of you're one of us.
The one thing though that I agree that there is a certain credibility that you have if you had practiced. Although I think a number of knowledge management leaders that I know may not have practiced or may not be lawyers, but the one thing that I feel like comes out of a lot of the conversations we have with leaders, whether it's on my podcast or the virtual lunch, as you know, is that they always say that the most powerful quality that you can demonstrate today is curiosity. That comes up all the time. And so if you're simply curious and a lawyer that's willing to listen to what the challenges are, where there are opportunities, you may really set yourself apart, even if we all have this sort of lawyer's mindset, if you will, that isn't necessarily always consistent with what it means to be a knowledge management leader or an innovator. I think there's a certain type of lawyer like Patrick and like Stephanie that are sort of have that ability to process the practice and elements that elevate the practice simultaneously such that they then become leaders in a different space that's kind of within the same industry.
Yeah, I think to be a bit more controversial, Mr. Switzerland, and I think it's really I know what you mean. There's some amazing, and I wouldn't want to discourage anyone who hasn't been a lawyer from, especially people who do have that culture of, who do have that curiosity. But I do think that when I became I as we're both former practicing lawyers, when I became a journalist, everyone used to get so infuriated with me because every single phone call I would phone someone up and say, "Oh, I used to practice at Norton Rose," because it would open doors with people that nobody else could open, and they would be my colleagues who were sat around me at Legal Week, like, if we hear you say that one more time, we're literally going to smack you. And I did it on purpose because they would tr almost like have a trust. And I know that's different because I'm a journalist, right? And I was coming at it from a very different point of view from being an internal person. But I think it's important to acknowledge sometimes, that the fact that there's so many different reasons why it would be that the I don't know, so many, like the ability to retain information and use it, and a level of understanding, and I don't know what it is really, but yeah, and I do think there's an element of snobbery about it as well. But then I know you wouldn't agree with me on that.
No, I understand what you're saying. I remember when I told my grandmother, I was very close with my grandmother, and I remember I told her that I was going to stop practicing law and be a writer full time, and she was just perplexed. She was just like, "Well, what do I tell my friends?" I was like, "Well, can't you tell them I'm a writer? I'm like actually writing a book. Isn't that cool?" She's like, "I guess it's cool. It's okay. Can I say that you're?" And I was like, "You know what, Nana? You can tell them I'm a lawyer and a writer. Does that make you feel better? Because I'm not going to not be a lawyer." She's like, "Oh, that's a good idea." It's like this very funny conversation. So, it's sort of the reverse there, that I wasn't even saying I was a lawyer. I was saying I was a writer, but I get it. But I totally appreciate that. And I also, when I tell people I practiced for nearly 9 years, I feel like that means something because it wasn't 5 minutes. It was like a real period of
Yeah.
time. There was meaningful work that I did. I got to work on interesting projects with super, super smart, dynamic individuals. So I I agree, and I just think that a lot of this is sort of just building blocks for the next thing. And
Yeah.
I think, that's it's a
It's
lot of where we are now.
it's really interesting to see, how knowledge is changing, in terms of where it lives. I was speaking to somebody earlier at a firm where they're really having a big, and this isn't public domain yet, actually, they're having a really big shuffle around of what they're doing with knowledge and where it lives, and they're sort of moving it within, I guess making it within more of a commercial, um I don't want to probably say too much, to be honest, but it's quite interesting, isn't it? I think that with this, very much it's always been a tech element to knowledge, and people that have thrived have often had that deep understanding of tech. But I think more than ever, it's become almost all about tech. And then there are questions as to where it lives, who they hire, and how they develop the knowledge team, which I think it's almost like there's another sea change coming.
Law firms have been trying to figure out how to address and combine these issues for a while. Right? What is the law librarian doing? Where does KM sit? Where is innovation? Now there's an AI leader. It's difficult. I think the pandemic also accelerated a lot of that conversation and tried to help firms consolidate this in a way that brings people who are doing some of the same things, using some of the same resources. And I have had several conversations in my podcast about people, law firms developing applications that have been born out of initiatives in knowledge management that they then use commercially. Either they license or they use it as a value add for their clients. So the firms that have figured out how to commercialize some of that activity also then just expand the influence of those individuals, which is happening now because every firm is trying to develop some kind of a policy, some protocol, some guardrails. And frankly, those firms are also helping their clients, using it as a
Yeah.
as a guideline and saying to their in-house counsel teams, look, this is what our policy looks like. This is what we do. if you use Copilot, you're welcome to use it for your purposes. And I think that's a really good way to add value to a client relationship.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that the head of AI role, we haven't seen that in the UK. So obviously that's taken off amongst the big firms, and that is really interesting area in terms of what does that mean for the other senior roles, for the other C roles, so the CIO, whatever the I might stand for in that, like and the AI, the head of AI. And I know people who in the UK, senior IT people who are and who are known internationally and involved with the US as well, who are really not fans of it. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. I know that wasn't what we were talking about, but I just think that in amongst all of this change and finding, I agree, knowledge, there's been over the years figuring out where it lives. I think it's had such a growth in power and influence over the last year, 2 years. And now it's a case of, okay, well, what does that mean for the firm and where it lives? And I think that the head of AI role will also have to be, they'll have to think through this strategically so that there's not, we've seen over the years as well, these kind of power plays within firms, which is really not constructive. You've seen it between IT and knowledge, perhaps, or IT and innovation, where the two, it's not clear, where they don't necessarily work together well, and there's not clear lines or whatever, or clear ways of supporting one another. And I think that it could, the least healthy thing is where they're competing. So hopefully firms will find a way to avoid that.
I just actually had a conversation with a partner at a law firm who is the head of that law firm's AI practice. And it'll be interesting to see what that looks like in terms of the collaboration there between the practice group leaders in a meaningful practice like that and the people who are running AI initiatives at the organization. And I think that role is still fairly rare. I mean, rare relative to how many and how common the knowledge management leadership role is in organizations.
I think everyone's going to have one though. Like I think it was it the DOJ that started it? They got their head of AI, and then a bunch of the really big US law firms have appointed a head of AI. It seems to be happening quite quickly. It's still early days, but I spoke to the head of knowledge at one of the big US firms, and he said everyone's going to get one, because yeah, I mean, partly because because everybody, if one or two firms have got one, then that's kind of then the thing. But yeah, because I guess because there's so much going on in that space that they almost need dedicated resource. But you're right, I mean, the AI group that you're just talking about sounds like they were client facing, and obviously a lot of the tech and the stuff that we talk about is back end, but there's so much blurring now, isn't there? That's the fascinating thing that we used to talk about. Well, we don't write about utilizing technology in terms of advising clients on technology. TMT type teams wouldn't be of interest, but now there's so many blurrings of the lines. It's like, well, what do we write about?
Well, the one thing that I think it will be important here for those roles, and I'm sure the people who create those roles and who occupy those roles are thinking about this, but every year I do a report on legal operations, and I ask legal operations leaders how they measure success, how their law departments measure success, how they measure the success of what legal operations specifically is doing, what they're bringing to the table. And that's a challenge. It's really a challenge for a lot of organizations. So when you create a new role that sounds amazing and just seems super cool, the question is, what is the measure of the utility of that role? Like, what is the success factor that drives whatever appreciation or value of that role? And I think what is lucky for those people is that I think they get to shape what that looks like. And in certain roles, for example, the idea of risk avoidance or cost avoidance is harder to measure than just saying, oh, we are in the firm X. And so they have to do a little bit of creative gymnastics in terms of showing metrics or identifying how they have made a tremendous impact. I think those roles are going to be really interesting to see what that looks like and how they're measured.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, because they're not, then it's a big cost, right? It's a huge cost.
Well, especially if it's new, right? KM, there are metrics, there are benchmarks, there are ways that you can compare what one role is doing versus another in a newly formed role. And I think innovation was kind of like this
Yeah.
years ago. Just what does that look like? And in fact, I remember some of my peers being the head of knowledge management and innovation. They were adding that role rather than just being the head of innovation. And even the people I remember who became exclusively the head of innovation, that was a gradual change from e-discovery to knowledge management, then to innovation. And I would imagine that those people are first in line to become chief of artificial intelligence, right? Like, so because they, well, just because they have the experience and they also know what it means to shape a new role within a law firm and how to fit it into expectations. So, by
Yeah.
if I had to make a prediction, it would be that the new roles will be occupied people in older roles who are capable and savvy and also super curious.
That's the best thing, I think, because you get these people that come in from outside of sector, and they, with respect to anybody who's done it well, but they come in with their big proclamations about legal is rubbish, and we're going to overturn this, and we've got our great ideas, and we're going to do it differently. And usually they don't last very long because it's a case of law firms are very profitable and they are also very slow to change. And actually, sometimes change is better done from within an organization, like little by little, right? By people who really understand how things work. And so I think those people would be great for the role if they've got a deep understanding of the technology.
You know, I feel like there's a little bit of a sea change happening where, yes, historically legal in the aggregate has been brushed. There's been a broad stroke with a broad brush about the fact that it's slow to change and it's change isn't really an imperative because it does so well and it's a very successful sector. But I feel like generative AI has changed that a little bit because legal is so appropriate in terms of a profession for deploying this technology. And every time it changes, there's an understanding that it's capable of more. So maybe legal is turning and becoming a little bit more of a leader, I think. And because there's so many use cases where, look, you mentioned earlier that Workday acquired Eversort,
Yeah.
and which is great for that team, really nice group of people. And but you're just Eversort earned its reputation in legal. And I just think that you're seeing more of this, outside legal coming into legal because there's an expertise that's been developed in an area where the use cases are suitable, highly suitable for this kind of technology that may be different than other sectors.
I agree. I agree that it's going to cause huge change, but I still think I'm less perhaps. I think we'll be forced to change, but I think that culturally, the challenge always has been that the same people are running the same firms, and they are bright, brilliant people, but the partnership structure that we know and love so well does not necessarily encourage change. And the people that run it, they're inclined to do things in the same way. They're bright, brilliant people, but there's a limit perhaps to how much you can implode your own business model from within the business model, right? It's a really difficult thing. It's interesting because I had an exclusive last week or the week just gone or the week before about a private equity company that's buying up UK law firms, and they've got
Hmm.
ambition to be a top 50 law firm. They're called Lawfront. And they're actually creating their own practice management system with Microsoft and a company called ShareDo. And their model is to acquire law firms and effectively give the senior management, an out, because as we know, the most senior people in a law firm who have the most decision making are the ones who, almost because they're coming towards the end of their career, are the ones who typically, not always, are less keen to invest heavily in technology. It's that model which is always a challenge. So this private equity company, one of the models is they give them an exit and they buy them out, and then they invest a ton in technology, and they combine the firms, and that's what they're doing. So they've got 4 firms, and they're in talks to acquire more. They're already generating, I think it's £70 million a year, and their ambition is to generate 150 million within a fairly short space of time. And they're, as I say, investing heavily, and they've just building their own practice management system using Microsoft because that's the way that they think is going to be most efficient. So it's kind of fascinating, seeing when it's really done differently.
Well, we're basically living in the innovator's dilemma. There's a book by Clay Christensen talking
Yeah.
about this very issue, and law firms are exactly in that moment of, well, we have this one business that's running great, and we have people that do what they've done always. Maybe they use a little bit of technology, but they're not really changing much. And then you can completely disrupt that business model by having a generative AI draft all kinds of documents, a piece of automation that will, and all of a sudden you're sort of simultaneously on a parallel road running a business that is disrupting the core. I think that we'll see how that shakes out. That's we are literally in that moment right now, and it's
Moment, Ari.
it's super interesting to see.
And we're reporting on it. Editor in chief,
Well, because we chart
chief,
change, we're not
editor in
really.
chief, chief
Yeah.
principal.
Our principal of Ari Kaplan advisors, but
Hey,
yeah.
I want to, before we go, I
Oh
interrupted
yeah.
you. Sorry. I don't want you to, because you're always like really good at, hey, it's been great talking to you. Before
Oh,
we go,
you were afraid I was going to cut you off.
right? I can feel one of those moments, and I just wanted to do a shout out because Ari got given an award this
Oh
week, yesterday,
gosh.
for some work that you're doing, which is an amazing. So Ari does a ton of work for charity, and you just got given the most amazing award, recognizing your contributions. And a lot of you will have heard about this. What's the actual What's the charity called?
It's called the Apostles House, and it was called the Champion of Hope Award, and it
And
was
that's
just, thank you for recognizing it. But it was just, my daughter and I have been collecting cans of food, my family and I should say, for over a decade, and we donated to this food bank, and I had it really the recognition, I have to say, was a result of the virtual lunch. And I think that's the wonderful thing about the virtual lunch. I've hosted this virtual lunch still for 4+ years, and the community on the virtual lunch. My daughter was doing some advocacy work to let people know more about food insecurity and the work of this organization that supports homeless women and children. And I then used the work that she was doing to help her broadcast what that effort was. And then the virtual lunch community got more involved, and they started becoming donors and benefactors. And we ended up sponsoring the dining room of this new facility. It's basically the virtual lunch dining room, which I thought was funny because we never eat on the virtual lunch. And yet now there'll be a community of folks who are eating in the dining room that the virtual lunch has decorated and paid for. And so anyway, there were some members of the virtual lunch community there: Jennifer Gilman, Ann Gore, Lydia Flocchini, who actually came in to be at the table, and it was just wonderful. And I was really honored. So thanks for mentioning it. It's kind of
oh
you.
my goodness,
Yeah.
congratulations. That's an
Thanks a lot.
amazing
Yeah, yeah,
achievement.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, so when the next time I will see you, I guess it's not going to be for a while. I will be in Chicago at Relativity Fest next week, but you're going to be in
ClearCon,
CleoCon in
Texas.
Austin.
Yes, I can't
Yeah.
wait.
Yeah. Well,
We'll
super
miss each
cool.
other. I won't
Both
see you,
fun
but
events.
yeah, we'll
Yes, but
feedback on those though next time.
I look
And
forward to it. Caroline Hill, as always, a privilege. Thank you so much.
Ari Kaplan, thank you very much too.